This week on Depeche Mode, the podcast, the passing of the lead singer of a band closely aligned with Depeche Mode. And it pains me to have to bring you this news on this week's episode. Also, we may have all of the track names for the unreleased, fully produced Memento Mori songs. Depeche Mode M movie review. I have a very special surprise for those podcast listeners of the show. So if you're enjoying this on YouTube, I would encourage you to head on over to whatever podcast platform you use and make sure that you download this week's episode for this very special addition to the podcast this week.
Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
My Nerd World.
I'm your host, Jon Justice, on Depeche Mode, the podcast. I'm glad you are with another episode this week as we dive into all of the news, both sad and exciting as well. I want to mention briefly a programming note. The intention was to have Rob Rom on the show this week from the Global Depeche fan group. Unfortunately, because of my own personal work schedule, I simply didn't know when I was going to have the opportunity to go and record the podcast and therefore couldn't coordinate with Rob. So hopefully we'll get him on the show in the very, very near future. That being said, we have a lot of ground to cover on the podcast this week. And first off, we start off with just some absolutely tragic news. I saw a post on Wednesday afternoon on Facebook from the family members that were relaying that, unfortunately, the co-founding vocalist of the English industrial dance outfit, as it's described in the article in front of me from Billboard, Nitzer Ebb, Douglas McCarthy, has passed away at the age of 58. Now, as I mentioned, McCarthy's death was confirmed by Nitzer Ebb's official social media account. And this happened on Tuesday, so I missed the actual official release announcement. I didn't see this until Wednesday. And they said, "It is with a heavy heart that we regret to inform that Douglas McCarthy has passed away this morning on June 11th, 2025. You know, the date is of somewhat significance given the proximity to the passing, of course, a number of years ago of Andy Fletcher. We're also coming up on the anniversary once again of the Music for the Masses 101 show at the Rose Bowl. So, June just ends up continuing to be, and I'm not making light of it, but just a month of significance, both of celebration and of tragedy for Depeche Mode fans. They went on to say, "We ask everyone to please be respectful of Douglas and his wife during this difficult time. We appreciate your understanding and we'll share more information soon." Now, McCarthy co-founded Nitzer Ebb back in 1982. Along with his school friends Yvonne Bon Harris and David Gaudet, with the group taking inspiration from the post-punk genre from their early single releases. That sound soon evolved into a more industrial and electronic-laced influence, with the band quickly becoming regarded as noted figures within the electric body music scene, a genre that combined elements of industrial punk and dance music. I don't ever remember their music being described as electronic body music. As a matter of fact, that's the first time I've actually seen that particular phrase or uttered it on the podcast. I've always just referred to them as being an industrial group. Now, their debut album, That Total Age, issued in 1987, and though avoiding chart success, the single Join in the Chant would reach number one on the dance club charts. Nitzer Ebb would remain a fixture of the chart in the coming years, with singles such as Control I'm Here, Lightning Man, Fun to Be Had, and just what a fantastic album that was. All appearing therein, with the latter giving the band their highest peak when it reached number 5 in 1990. And they would also impact the alternative airplay charts, with 1991's Family Man giving them a career high when they reached number 21. Now, Nitzer Ebb, I don't recall whether or not I was familiar with Nitzer Ebb prior to them joining the tour as the opening act for the World Violation Tour. I want to say that I was, but it's difficult to know. I will say that, in my opinion, Nitzer Ebb opening for Depeche on that tour in promotion of Violator was probably one of the most significant opening acts that they've had next to The. Now, The is a personal favorite of mine, so I would imagine from the fandom at large, while there have been some amazing opening acts for the band throughout their years, Nitzer Ebb was just significant in that moment in time because it was almost as if what Nitzer Ebb was doing in the opening act for Depeche on tour was an interesting comparison and juxtaposition. Whereas Depeche had this electronic focus to their music, the blues element was there, but it was teetering on that industrial sound, but of course, more pop in its delivery. It's almost as if you had a progression of electronic music, you would go like industrial to, Nitzer Ebb to Nine Inch Nails in terms of accessibility, and then more mainstream appeal with Depeche Mode. Getting back to the article, 1991's Ebbhead would be their only record to reach the Billboard 200. 1995's Big Hit would be the band's last few years, with Nitzer splitting soon after its release. I loved Ebbhead, of course, produced by Flood. And again, during this period of time, sort of the peak of Depeche Mode's power and popularity, dovetailing off of Violator into Songs of Faith and Devotion, anything attached to the band, even ancillary, was incredibly popular. And so my fandom of Depeche Mode would extend beyond the band and then, of course, into Nitzer Ebb, not only because of their association, but obviously because of their music as well. Speaking to just the popularity and just how devoted we are to Depeche Mode. And it still remains that way to a certain extent, although a lesser extent than during that particular Apex Mountain time period of the band. McCarthy would contribute to Recoil, the solo project from Alan Wilder of Depeche Mode through the 90s, later collaborating with a French producer Terence Fixmer as one half of Fixmer McCarthy. Nitzer Ebb would reform in 2006 and release their final album, Industrial Complex, in 2010. In 2013, McCarthy would release his only solo album, Kill Your Friends. In recent years, McCarthy had suffered from a noted health issues, with Harris taking over vocals for a series of 2021 performances after McCarthy collapsed before a show due to a pre-existing medical condition. In early 2024, McCarthy announced he would no longer be performing live after being diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver. So, again, just far too young at 58, and, a band that will, certainly be remembered for their significance in the electronic industrial dance music. Its attachment to Depeche Mode, but even beyond that. And again, going back to that era of industrial music, they were right there. Again, they were right there in the middle between, Einstürzende Neubauten, and I know I butchered that name, in terms of industrial music that was much less accessible to the mainstream. Nitzer Ebb would be sort of that bridge that would fill in the gap for individuals who liked the electronic dance music, but again, wanted to hear something that was a little bit more accessible. And certainly with Ebbhead, that was when they really were teetering closer to something sounding like Depeche Mode while still keeping that edge that made them so special. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and move on. Chris Culpepper had wrote in this week for listener feedback and emails, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. If you're enjoying this up on YouTube, of course, leave a comment there. We'll get to his email a little bit later on. However, I hadn't seen this yet, but over on the Depeche Mode Reddit page, somebody had gone in to look at the registered trademark tracks for Depeche Mode. And we've done this in the past. We did this, I did this, other people did this, heading, toward the release of Memento Mori, clamoring for news about the album. You would head into the registered trademarks from the label to maybe get a glimpse of songs that would be released. And some of those song titles, I believe, may have changed in terms of title. However, as Chris Culpepper shared with me, a screen grab taken from registered trademarked tracks regarding Martin Gore. In it, you see the series of Memento Mori tracks written by Martin Gore. And then you also see two songs that we haven't heard yet, Loose Cannon and If You Want To. Now, they're being registered next to the pre-existing Memento Mori tracks, I think lends a lot of credibility to their validity. So if this is accurate, then unless In the End was named something else, which I can't imagine that it was, we have our 4 track titles for the unreleased, fully produced tracks. Life 2.0, which Martin Gore has mentioned in interviews for the promotion of Memento Mori. Of course, we now have In the End. And again, for you podcast listeners, be waiting for the end of the podcast. I have something very special to share, and I'll reiterate for you YouTube watchers, you'll want to go and download the podcast on whatever podcast platform you use. So we have In the End, Life 2.0, and then these 2 tracks are to be confirmed, Loose Cannon and If You Want To. Now, regarding when we end up hearing these tracks, I've been told, as I mentioned, that these tracks will be released in promotion of the film M, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. Clearly, In the End is going to be released with that, as it was included on the, in the beginning of the credits for the film. So I would imagine that probably with the physical release of the concert film, that we'll end up getting some sort of package that will include those 4 tracks. There's a lot of people speculating about the potential box set, a special box set for Memento Mori. I'm less inclined to believe that's going to happen. There's been so much distance since the album to come out with a special edition of it now seems a little late, wherein the physical release of the film to have 4 new tracks to coincide with it to help boost downloads and sales seems like the more logical thing to do. And a programming note on this week's episode, you're not hearing some of the typical transition sound effects that I normally do because I'm actually recording the episode this week in my radio show studio, again, just because my time is limited and I'm incredibly busy at the moment, but I wanted to make sure that I got the podcast out. So I don't have access to those particular sound effects that you typically hear on the episode. So I just want to give you a bit of an update as to why you're not hearing the traditional transition sounders that I use. So with that, let's get into this review of Depeche Mode's new concert film. I've actually seen a few clips from the film. I'm not going to watch any more, just simply because I don't want to be spoiled. But I've probably seen, 6-7 minutes, maybe 10 minutes worth of the film. I've seen some of the concert footage, and then have watched enough to get a good idea of what the non-concert footage will entail. And listen, it looks like a really interesting combination of what we saw with the Playing the Angel live concert release. Not so much in terms of the filming of the concert itself. The concert footage that I watched from the film seemed fairly straightforward of what you would expect. Something along the lines of live in Barcelona. Certainly done in a very cinematic way. I was very impressed with what I saw of the live footage in this essentially concert film. The additions of what Fernando Frias did in adding in the other elements relating to the Mexican holiday and Mexican culture, definitely unique. Much of it in black and white. Interpretively stylistic and fitting in well with the essence of Memento Mori. So I was fairly impressed with what I saw. It reminded me a bit, too, I guess the other correlation I want to give, and Rob Rahm mentioned this in his comments last week after seeing the film, is that he was reminded of Strange, and I certainly got that vibe as well. Definitely not Anton Corbijn, but in terms of the artistry of the additional footage added to the film, it definitely had that vibe, and it felt very cohesive and consistent. Not a documentary film such as 101, something closer to what Anton Corbijn did with the Live in Berlin, Alive in Berlin, intermixed with fan interviews. But what I saw, I felt was very impressive and has me even more excited to see the film. Now, let me go ahead and get to this. And I believe I pulled this from Variety, if I'm not mistaken. The director behind the new documentary, M, links the cultural significance of the Mexican holiday, celebrating the Day of the Dead with the music of the electro synth pop band, which is indisputably a new wave pioneer. It's an ambiguous concept, but also an intriguing one. At the June 5th world premiere of M at the Tribeca Film Festival, Frias was joined by Depeche Mode's Dave Gahan and Martin Gore for a boisterous screening of the 95-minute film that often felt as much like a live concert as the ones depicted on screen. Gahan said during the panel, one of the things about Depeche Mode's concerts, it's a communal experience. And if you listen to last week's episode, I included the entirety of that Q&A that took place after the debut of the movie. That experience was filmed during a 3-night stand in Mexico City's Foro Sol Stadium in 2023, where a total of more than 200,000 fans pilgrimaged to watch the sleek, massive production that showcased Gahan twirling around on stage like Stevie Nicks in a 3-piece suit, Gore sharing his keyboard and guitar skills, as well as his angelic voice and songs from 4 decades of synth-drenched creativity. Frias and his arty approach toggled back and forth between black and white and color video and many of his camera shots, and close-up of the heel of Dave Gahan's boot, a quick cut to a cluster of fans waving white-gloved hands during Never Let Me Down Again, per tradition, confirmed how much he wanted this documentary to be different. In between songs, including the moody My Cosmos Is Mine. Now, he included Don't Say You Love Me. That was a mistake, so I went ahead and changed it for him because I know that Soul With Me is the Martin Gore track that's included in the film. Both from 2023's Memento Mori album, Remember You Will Die. Voiceovers from fans and lines from poetry are presented in Spanish. The serene scene of a swamp shifts to an overhead drone shot of the concert, with Gahan executing mesmerizing calisthenics during the somber ballad of Speak to Me, his resonant voice cutting through a cloud of synthesizers. A lesson about the Aztec guardian of the underworld prefaces Gore's stunning rendition of Soul With Me, another Frias thoughtful connection between the song and spirit. So I guess I included it for him where he actually went and included it himself. Longtime fans of Depeche Mode will relish the vibrant performances of classics, Enjoy the Silence, Personal Jesus, but they will likely most appreciate the dedication to the original member Andy Fletcher, who died in 2022 at age 60. Dot matrix printouts of Fletcher's face bob throughout the crowd as Gahan bends his fingers to form eyeglasses and holds his arms overhead in a mask-like pose as the band performs World in My Eyes. The video screens blanketing the back of the stage illuminate with Fletcher's photo and a sweet tribute to the new wave innovator. While the theme of mortality is threaded throughout the film, it is also balanced with hope, appreciation, and more than a dab of realism. As one fan asks rhetorically, thinking something will last forever isn't good, right? And again, from what I saw of the film, I'm really excited for it. I'm pleased personally that it is more of a concert film than it is something akin to what Anton Corbijn had done with Spirits in the Forest. And my expectation, as I mentioned last week, is that we'll obviously get a physical release of the film, but that may be all that we get of the live show unless they decide to go ahead and release the entirety of the footage and compile it into the full concert. That seems like it would be a very large task. With editing to include all of the songs, depending on how much work was done in the editing process to make the film itself, they may have, already edited the entire film, in which case they can just put the songs together. So that remains to be seen. But I also have that expectation, as I've been told, that we will get all 4 of those tracks, not just in the end with the actual release of the album. I also want to make a quick correction, and I know some of you are probably already typing to me. I had, my apologies, talking about the passing of Douglas McCarthy from Nitzer Ebb. Fletch passed away in May. The reason I made that mistake is because my dear friend Drew, who passed away that same year, passed away the following month in June. And so I was conflating that in my mind because I couple those two things together as they were, sort of back-to-back heartbreaks for me personally. And, of course, with the passing of Fletch, heartbreaking in and of itself. So here's what I'm going to do. Just because I am incredibly short on time this week, I do have your emails from over the week, and I appreciate those. I'm going to hang on to all of these. Maybe I'll do a bonus podcast this weekend, depending on my schedule. If not, we'll certainly take the time and do an extended listener feedback portion on next week's show, just simply because I'm pressed for time and I need to get back to getting ready for doing my weekly radio show, which I'm about an hour away from going live on. So with that, for you watching on YouTube, thank you so much for checking out the episode. As always, if you want to support the podcast and you enjoy listening to, or reading more specifically, but you can do both, science fiction, I hope you'll check out my science fiction space opera adventure series, EMBARK. I wrote it out of my love of Star Wars, being a fan since I was 5 years old. All 7 books in the series are available on Amazon.com. Go and check them out today. EMBARK, E-M-B-A-R-K, Jon, Jon Justice, and you can find them there. If you want to follow me on social media, at Jon Justice, Jon on X. You can also follow me on Instagram, The Jon Justice, TikTok as well, and Facebook, Jon Justice. You can find me there too. So drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. And for you YouTube watchers, again, I would encourage you to go and download the podcast.